Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming along today. So yes, my name is Angela, and I'm an illustrator and animator from Scotland. So I work in 2D to create bright, surreal illustrations and animations that have a sense of joy and nostalgia that runs through them. So I'm really interested in creating these zany worlds that are filled with really expressive, oddball characters, and I really just love to explore all of that through animation with all the endless possibilities the medium offers. And in case you're not familiar with my work, here is just a snippet of what I do. Thank you. So today I would really just like to talk about the importance of making space for personal projects. In my opinion, they're the foundation to any creative career. And beyond that, I believe if we can carve out space regularly to create just for ourselves, it can bring a really deep sense of joy. Personal projects allow you to develop your own voice and point of view. And in my experience, they've helped me through times when I felt creatively burnt out, giving me a space to experiment and find the joy in making again. I think personal projects are key no matter what stage you are in your career. And today I'll just talk a little bit about how they've helped me. So back to the beginning of my career. So I graduated 10 years ago and got my first job as a graphic designer in a creative agency. I was very excited to learn. Fresh out of university, I thought I was going to be working on dazzling rebrands, exciting packaging jobs, beautiful print work. But sadly, the reality was not like that at all. I had very little creative freedom, was regularly working really long hours for little pay, and over time I did start to develop this rising sense of misery. I was feeling so burnt out and depressed, and all I could talk about was how much I hated this job. I really needed an outlet and a space to express my frustration, and this is when I discovered the power of personal projects. I started making little graphics, which became like a diary for how I was feeling during this time. And I think the feelings are very evident, going nowhere fast. Push button to destroy everything. The end is nigh, and it's all downhill from here. As you can tell, I was feeling really good. I had also taught myself how to animate very crudely in After Effects. This is the story of a murderous cat at a fun fair. And it's funny because although this was 10 years ago, and the visual style has evolved a lot, I think the tone of my work has remained pretty much the same. At the time, I didn't really know where I was going with this. It wasn't really for anything, but carving out this time to make things for me brought some happiness back into my life. And in retrospect, without this exploration, the work I make today just wouldn't exist. So in 2020, after a huge argument with my boss, I quit my boring job. And suddenly I had a lot of free time on my hands. But again, during this time, I turned back to drawing. not with any sort of grand plans to become an illustrator, but really just for my own pure enjoyment. And as I drew, I started to have these overwhelming feelings like, oh, you know, it would be so much better if these drawings could move. I had ideas for scenes and characters and actions, but really just no clue how to animate frame by frame in the way that I wanted to. Enter The Animator's Survival Kit by Richard Williams. Some of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with this book. I picked up this book after hearing that, you know, really it was the book to help beginners in animation with lots of notes and diagrams on how to make moving pictures. But in fact, it almost turned me off animation altogether. The book begins by espousing the importance of being a master at drawing. You know, really it is most important that you're an excellent draftsperson with a good understanding of anatomy and form before you should even attempt animation. And, you know, this is something that could take years or, you know, maybe even a lifetime to accomplish. So then I looked at my sketchbook and I was a bit like, oh, you know, I remember thinking, wow, I really would have loved to have done animation, but I guess that dream for me is now dead. But as I read on, I began to question Richard's principles. Dedicate a lifetime to learning to draw and animate? Well, I have dedicated this weekend, Richard, and I am ready to learn. Learn to draw before you start animating? Well, too late. I'm sorry, Richard, I've already broke that rule too. But the best part was learning how to draw perfectly bouncing boobs, which, if you can't do, can you really call yourself an animator? At this point, I realized maybe this book shouldn't be taken as gospel, and maybe I could also disregard that opening chapter that had made animation feel so out of reach, because ultimately, I just wanted to make animation for my own personal enjoyment. I do need to say, I know there may be some Richard lovers in the house today. I'm sorry. You know, the book was not all bad and does have some useful things in it. But anyway, from this point, I decided I would actually just try to learn to animate my own way through trial and error. So I would start with simple prompts like this, pogo stick. Next, I would think, how high can they bounce? All the way up to space? What's above space? A big part of my exploration was finding ways to imbue characters or inanimate objects with personalities. Through how they move, you know, I could kind of get a sense of their mood. And to me, that's just what I find really the most exciting thing about animation. It's that art of movement, and rather than thinking about what moves, it's thinking about how something moves that can communicate the idea or the feeling. I was also just, you know, really inspired by what was around me. So this was inspired by my dog, Hamish. And every time we take Hamish out, people love to stop to talk to him, to pet him. So I imagined him as this sort of Pied Piper, but with a saxophone, with crowds of people following him wherever he goes. So again, with this, it was really just experimenting with the movement. I had been too impatient to follow the walk cycle diagram from the Animator's Survival Kit, so I just tried to make my own, and I remember I burst out laughing when I saw it all played back together because I wasn't expecting the characters to look so unhinged, but I quite liked it. I suppose it adds to that sense of chaos in the animation. And through these personal projects, I really realized there's no right or wrong way to do anything. And I found actually embracing my limits, like not knowing how to animate properly, has actually led to way more interesting and fun work. The flaws and the imperfections are what gives the animation character and personality. And, you know, the whole point of animation is really that anything can be possible. I think the key is really just to enjoy the process, and whatever happens after that is a bonus. I think if I had thought about trying to make animations for other people to enjoy, it really would have just been too much pressure. Instead, with these personal animations, I was really just trying to think of doing, what do I enjoy, and, what would make me laugh. I think if you can make space for personal projects, make sure that it's something that you're interested in and that you find joy in making. I think it can be very tempting to make things that feel trendy or follow a formula that might get you likes, but I think if you follow that path, it's not really sustainable and you'll probably just burn yourself out. I think of a creative career like a marathon rather than a sprint. And you really just need to take it easy, don't rush, and give yourself the time to find what you like doing. So working on these personal projects and sharing them, I started to get client work for the likes of Adult Swim, Nike, Lazy Oaf, and the New York Times. I was so busy, which was great, but I began to feel quite stressed again. It was just a lot, and I started not really enjoying it so much. I really missed having time again for my personal work. But you should always be careful what you wish for, because there did come a point when things did quieten down, and I soon found I had perhaps a little bit too much time in my hands. Okay. Well, I did spiral slightly. I think when you do your passion as a job, it can get very messy. Not only does your identity get entangled with it, but when it dries up, you can feel a bit purposeless. But at this point, I decided it was time to start a new personal project. And from my identity crisis came a short film called Marvin. A film about a bird who can't fly and is just an expression of the purposelessness I felt at this time. So developing the story wasn't really linear. I would just spitball ideas, and if one made me laugh, I would try to weave it into the storyline. So for Marvin, it meant if he couldn't fly, he would have to find purpose some other way. So maybe he tries working as a chef, but his life flashes before his eyes when he comes across the carcass of another bird. Or thinking, how would a bird who can't fly travel abroad? Well, sadly, I realized in some scenarios they'd have to get a plane, which at the time just really tickled me. And once I had a bunch of these scenarios, I started to stitch them into a rough storyline. It was quite a holistic process making the film. The music had a big influence in shaping the story. I really prefer animating two music so they feel as one. And I was looking for something that felt really playful and upbeat, and I found this great jazz track by the band Otla. The track has just this feeling of spontaneity. It fell all over the place and a little bit chaotic, and these were qualities I could imagine Marvin having himself. Sections of the track then helped with some of the details in the storytelling. For example, a particular cymbal crash or rhythm would maybe determine how a character would move in that scene. Creating the style frames are one of my favourite parts of the process because it's exciting imagining how the final thing might actually look, and it really helps to sort of tie down that feeling that you're trying to capture. So while I didn't have a lot of detail for the film story, I did have this really strong image of how I knew I wanted it to end, which is a bird's eye view of Glasgow Central Station, my local train station that is always filled with really mangy, borderline, scary birds. So that became the first style frame, which I referenced back to regularly to make sure every new scene I'd create felt quite cohesive. When I started to think about how Marvin might look, it seemed obvious to me he was a bit of an oddball. Someone that would look a bit out of place, so that should be reflected in how he looks. He's probably a bit small, maybe a bit mangy. If I thought about how those pigeons in Glasgow Central look, they're a bit rough, a bit beat up, missing some toes. He's also a bird that can't fly, so I wanted that to be reflected in his anatomy with these really small, underdeveloped wings. It basically took me a lot of drawings before I found my Marvin. And this was definitely the hardest part of the process, as it felt like I was drawing these birds that maybe looked a bit too stupid or a bit gormless, or sometimes they maybe ended up looking too evil. Most of my drawings weren't right for the tone of the animation, but I did manage to work some of them in as supporting characters. But finally, from all my attempts, this bird came out. He had just the right level of mangy, but was also full of so much personality and character. I didn't know the bird was going to be called Marvin until I saw this one, and I was just like, clearly this bird is called Marvin. My workflow is terrible in that I just animate in Photoshop. It is a slog and very laborious, but I actually love repetitive work. It's very meditative, and you can kind of shut your brain off a little bit when you're doing it. Unfortunately, when I was animating Marvin, I actually shut off too much of my brain, and when I thought I'd finished the project, I played it back and I realized Marvin was a different size in every scene. So I had to go back and redraw many, many, many frames. It was very upsetting. But to be honest, that's just what animation feels like. It can really hurt you, mentally, physically. Your head hurts, your eyes hurt, your back especially hurts. You have no social life because it takes up all your time, but it is quite addictive. There's such a feeling of magic when you play your animation back and everything comes to life. You can create these whole universes that otherwise wouldn't exist without you, sometimes with something as simple as pen and paper. To me, animation just feels like pure self-expression. You can make anything happen and you get to make the rules. So anyway, if you will indulge me 3 minutes, this is how Marvin turned out. Okay. Thank you. And so again, a personal project led to a commercial project. This time, one of the owners at CMYK Games had saw Marvin and asked if I wanted to illustrate a board game. The game in question was a new version of Magical Athlete. Originally released in 2003, the game is a Japanese roll and move game where you roll a dice and move your racer that amount of spaces. It's very simple. The racers themselves are a bunch of crazy characters with special powers, and you're battling each other all the way to the finish line. And yeah, you can kind of get that sense from the original fun sort of chibi style illustrated box cover. So the publisher, CMYK, really kind of put an emphasis on the visual designs of their games. You know, you can see from their games here, wavelength, monikers, and spots. They're going for a style that is quite different from traditional board games. Up until this point, my board game knowledge was limited to Monopoly and Risk and a couple of nerdy sci-fi games that my husband plays. So to see games, I think, being designed this way really kind of piqued my interest. Plus, looking at the existing version of the game, with a game board that was literally an image of pixelated brown dirt. It seemed like a project where I could, inject my own kind of spin with lots of scope for weird and wacky characters, and to also introduce lots of colour. So to help the publisher with a press release, I put together this illustration to just give a sort of flavour of the general tone of the new edition would have. It was all very exciting, and I couldn't wait to get started until enter Board Game Geek. We may have some board game fans in the audience today who know Board Game Geek, but for anyone unaware, think Rotten Tomatoes mixed with Reddit, but for board games. Now, unbeknownst to me, my teaser image had been uploaded to a discussion thread, and the internet had thoughts. So just a small selection of some of the lovely comments. We've got, not a fan of this cover. Well, it's not a cover, but okay. Looks like a cheap cartoon from the 70s. Cheap? Moi? Not a very attractive style. How dare you? I've seen this sort of thing reserved for, more like logo updates and corporate rebrands, but usually in the world of illustrations, people don't tend to have such strong reactions or thoughts. And if they do, it's usually quite positive. So this was a bit of a novelty, but I found it all hilarious. So to start the project, I began with the character designs. So the way the game works is you draft a team of characters to play over a series of races. The characters or racers need to reflect their unique power and movement on the board. So, for example, the centaur's power is that they can kick other racers back too, or Leap Toad, who can leap over and skip spaces occupied by other racers. So the brief was really to try and create as much movement within the art as possible, so thinking about animation smears and exploring speed lines and sort of dry brush effects to create that feeling of movement. The publisher sent over this was just the working spreadsheet of all the characters and their likely powers. I say likely as the game was still being developed and play tested at the same time that I was working on the art. So a lot of things were changing as I was drawing. It was very stressful. I had a lot of fun creating the sort of different characters, so some racers were easier to come up with for ideas with, like Blimp or Gunk. Others were a little bit trickier and did require some Googling on my part. I'm still not quite sure what a Baba Yaga is. I was creating the characters for the card art, but they also would become individual wood tokens. So as I experimented with some of the kind of more weirder characters, you really had to keep in mind how they might work logistically as a wooden piece with set uniform dimensions. So we had fun and created some special wooden tokens that broke from these dimensions. So, for example, legs here, the character we made an extra tall token for. That's not to say there wasn't the odd bit of miscommunication. For example, Huge Baby can't share a space with any other player. So we thought it would be really cool for that particular piece to be much bigger than the others. But when you mix up inches and millimeters, we accidentally made Huge Baby too huge. And so once all the characters had been created, we worked on the box cover. This was quite tricky because the characters had already been set, so we're trying to work out, which ones to use that would have the best balance of colors and the shape of them that would sort of fit together. I also created 2 racetrack boards for the game, Mild Mile, the easier version, and Wild Wilds, a version with more game elements that makes for a more chaotic game. We also worked on point tokens and card backings. And these are just a couple of spreads from the rulebook, which is filled with sort of diagrams explaining how the game actually plays. So really the illustration was quite heavy throughout this game. And I think in total, I created something like 100 illustrations from the cards through to the tokens, the board, the box, the rulebook, the dice, blah, 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 blah. And I think that was maybe 3 months to complete, so it was a very, very intense working period. But it has been my favourite project to work on, and I think it turned out well because I actually enjoyed working on it, which, surprise, surprise, is a good sign. But yeah, I think making space for personal projects is really what has given me my career today. In the beginning, they helped me get through that job that I really hated. They helped me to learn animation. They got me my first clients. They helped me when I was feeling really burnt out and I had no clients. So I would just say, personal projects are really what can help you to sustain a creative career over the long run. And I think they are just a necessity to any creative practice. Before I go, I would really like to share the work of Haneen Karatz, a Palestinian stop-motion animator and educator from Gaza. Despite the most horrifying circumstances, Haneen has been providing animation workshops to displaced women and children in Gaza over the last couple of years. Haneen has built up a team of female artists who have been hosting workshops across the Gaza Strip. With no schools left in Gaza, children have now missed over 2 years of education, so Haneen's workshops are a real lifeline. They provide a space for women and children to express themselves while temporarily escaping the sort of constant tension and fear that they're living under. One of their films is a comedy about a boy who has to wear his dad's clothes because he has no other clothes because of the blockades. And embarrassed by this, he tries to fashion outfits out of everything from aid boxes to leaves as chaos ensues. I think it's hard to overstate the importance of these films. The animations are not only an important record and documentation of the Palestinian experience at this present time, but I think that they're also a powerful act of resistance, preserving Palestinian culture in the face of violent attempts to erase it. So if you want to find out more about Haneen's work, you can find her on Instagram at animator_Haneen, and you'll also find a link to her GoFundMe page where she's raising funds to continue her animation workshops. Thank you for listening.
So, perfect. So, I hope it doesn't end up as a mystery as my introduction. By the way, I think during the day you can ask around. We've all been here in Czechia scared by Baba Yaga when we were kids.
Oh,
so
really?
You can find out more, yeah. And my question is, when I see your work, and I really love it, and when you're working on a personal project and you do so much work, on your own, and it's really personal. Like, how do you get feedback? Do you have some routines or some approach? How do you get feedback yourself, or do you ask others, or how?
I always think a good benchmark is if I myself can laugh, then I think this is good, and always a good sign that you're onto. I think a good project that is going to turn out well is if you're having fun making it. It's like if you've had, everyone's probably had the experience where it's just, you know, you're on a project that's just really dragging, and then at the end you hate it. But I think if it doesn't even feel like you're working, you're just, I can't wait to wake up again tomorrow and work on this. That's the best sign. I think that's like, you know, it's going to be good. So I think it's really just listening to yourself. What do I enjoy? Am I having fun? Then that's it's going to turn out well. That's how I measure it anyway.
Perfect. That's a nice advice.
Yeah.
And do you have any rituals, or that when you start working, or like when you need to create something, how do you?
Yeah,
how do you
that's
start?
so true. I've been thinking about this a lot recently because sometimes I think you can put so much pressure on yourself to be productive all the time, but I guess we're just human beings, right? And so much that I've learned recently is that you actually need to, there's no shortcuts to taking a break. You need to rest and I think physically look after yourself, like truly drink water and get enough sleep. And I think once you have the kind of basic, you know, blocks, building blocks, is then when you can go on and be creative. I used to think when I started my career, I was always doing all-nighters and not eating enough or eating rubbish just because I was like, I've just got to do more work. But it never works out in the end. I think if you're happy and you feel good in yourself, then the work that you come out with will be better. So I always just get my 9 hours sleep, 3 liters of water a day. That would be my ritual.
Perfect. Have you played the game yourself once?
Yeah, Magical Athlete. Yeah. It's very easy. It's borderline snakes and ladders, but a bit more exciting. It's very simple. Just roll the dice and move that many spaces. So yeah, it's quite a simple game.
Nice one. Do we have any questions from the audience? If we do, we will get you a microphone that's coming right behind you.
Okay, hello. I want to say I love your work, and I have 2 questions. One is about, like, for animation, you only use, like, your sketch and Photoshop only for making your animation?
Yeah, so I use Photoshop, but I use, there is a plugin called like animator, I think it's like a French one, and that makes the interface a bit easier. And then usually I would comp it together in After Effects. I don't really know how to use After Effects very well, but I just place the PSDs in there and it works somehow. But I have downloaded TV Paint. I think I can't learn a new program. So yeah, it's clunky, but everybody just learns a certain way, and then it's hard to change, I think, once you've learned a stupid way.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask about, like, gaining clients.
Uh-huh.
Like, you just have your own platform and you just post for yourself, and then that was like how, like, another person just see your work and they contact you.
Truly, yeah, that's it. Because I remember, like, I always wondered, I was like, how do people get clients? And mine's all just came through Instagram, which is, like, annoying because you hate to be so dependent on, like, this one platform, and you think, if this shut down, would my career be over? Maybe. But hopefully not. But anyway, I would say, yeah, you know what is so hard? It's such a, like, paradox, because on the one hand, I think, like, you know, if you're beholden to this platform, Instagram, like, I need to share, it can kind of warp your work, because I've done it as well, you start thinking, oh, this got likes before, maybe I should try and make something like that again, but that's totally the wrong way to do it. Just do what makes you happy. But if you want to get clients, you have to share your work, because otherwise, like, how would anyone know you exist? And I think you just have to feel, sometimes there's a feeling of embarrassment posting somehow, I always feel that, but you just have to be bold and just put yourself out there and then not think about it and just go on to the next thing that makes you happy.
Thank you so much, you're so inspiring.
Oh, thank you.
Perfect. We have more questions here.
Hello.
Is it on? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you still find time to do personal projects while you're working on projects for clients? Or do you see it as the same thing, for example, when you did the game?
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like, sometimes there can be, like, choke points where you only have time to do client work, and the nature of freelance is that you can't control what comes in. It would be nice to make everything just come in at different times, but sometimes it's like 3 projects at once and then nothing for 2 months. So usually in those kind of down times, I'll think, get back to personal projects, because I think when you're, I used to think, oh, client work, that's the best thing, like, well, obviously you want to get paid, but I don't know, they're actually quite joyless, really, I've found, because it's always what someone else wants. A lot of the time you find you're just a hand for hire. They're like, draw this like this. And so personal projects are just so important to, I think, keep you fresh as well and to keep you enjoying what you're doing. Because I think if I didn't do personal projects, I wouldn't want to be an illustrator anymore, really. Do you know what I mean? And it's just finding the joy, keeping the joy in it and keeping it fresh and keeping you progressing as well. I think personal projects are the time when you can experiment and try new things, because on a client project, it's, we need this yesterday and just do exactly this thing that you've done before. Clients always reference pre-existing work. They're not going to say, oh, Angela, that thought you had 3 weeks ago. They don't know that exists. So that's really the space to try new things and just keep pushing your kind of work, I think so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have some more questions? If not, thank you very much for the talk.
That's great. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Cheers.